The Microsoft Sustainability Calculator helps quantify your estimated Azure carbon emissions as well as savings from moving on-premises computing services to Microsoft Azure. In this demonstration, we'll see how a fictional company, Contoso, uses the calculator to analyze their carbon emissions. Enterprises operate their data centers at various levels of efficiency. The calculator asks you to self-select the efficiency of your own on-premises data center. Using December 2018 as our starting input, the calculator reports Contoso reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by 96%, which is equivalent to reducing 2 million vehicle miles from the planet. The calculator enables you to filter consumption data by Azure service type. You can also filter estimated emissions by region and time frame, to better understand where you consume services and match reporting to your own boundaries. For sustainability professionals, the reporting view provides additional detail and guidance that helps you report your greenhouse gas emission inventory for your company, such as through CDP. The renewables view can help you learn more about Microsoft renewable energy projects. The map shows all the worldwide locations where Microsoft has invested in renewable energy projects. Clicking a location on the map zooms you into the specific project for that location. Start gaining insights by downloading the Microsoft Sustainability Calculator today.
Okay, so let's get started. We've got lots of content to get through. Good afternoon. Welcome to our second AppDev Lunch and Learn for the professional services community. So my purpose of these sessions is to kind of cover topics that are new, not well known, so not just repeat content that already exists. Those that missed the previous session can see this recording, the recording of the April session at this link, and we kind of covered developer velocity, we covered GitHub code spaces, application insights, DevOps quick start, and various news updates. And then today's agenda is mainly about integration. We're going to cover logic app futures, and then I've got a few kind of updates at the end. So along the way, if you kind of use the chat, me and Dave may struggle to be presenting and answering the chat, but we'll do our best. If we don't answer questions, then please send them over. All the mics are currently muted or disabled. What we'll do at the end is we can enable them if people want to kind of ask questions. And a recording of this session will be made at the same link that you used to access today. So I've spoken to many people that are attending this call, but those that don't know me, to introduce myself, I'm Mark Harrison. My role is an Azure AppDev specialist, and I'm part of the various account teams that are aligned to your organizations. So and all the organizations are in that I kind of work with are in this UK professional services sector. So what that means is I'm aligned to you from an account point of view. So if you want kind of help, guidance, you want me to look at what you're doing, maybe challenge you, whatever. If it's AppDev focused, then just reach out if I can help. And then when you kind of reach out, I can then got access also to kind of cloud solution architects. So these are kind of very experienced, knowledgeable people, and they can help me and you when the ask is in depth and of a complex nature. So today I'm joined by Dave Phelps, who is from the Cloud Solution Architect team, and he's going to cover some of the futures. So to set the scene and to build up ready for Dave to take over and cover Logic App Futures, I'm just going to give a brief overview of Azure Integration Services. Okay, so any organization will depend on a wide variety of applications and data stores, and to perform tasks that run the business operations. And such applications could be packaged software, software as a service offerings, or custom developed applications. And then business value is realized when these applications can integrate with one another. And that's not only within the organization, but also kind of connecting with external applications from suppliers, customers, and partners. And application integration is often at the core of any digital transformation. But there are multiple challenges when it comes to application integration. And the real big issue really is the hodgepodge of different technologies are out there that makes it really tricky to make them interoperate. So for example, they could have different security or identity solutions underpinning them. Applications might have multiple different types of interfaces and APIs to connect with. Applications may have different data sources, different formats, and applications could be distributed and kind of running anywhere, everywhere. They could be in the cloud, they could be in multiple clouds, they could be across data centers, or they could be perhaps out in edge locations, maybe, for example, maybe in oil rigs or factories or cruise ships or in IoT devices. So to solve this complexity, we can break any integration requirement down into 4 basic building blocks, namely APIs, workflows, messages, and events. So APIs, application programming interfaces, these are kind of contracts that define how applications interact. They specify the kind of the types of calls, the requests that can be made, their purpose, and then the data formats. Workflows, they're kind of orchestrated and repeatable pattern of activity or business processes. Messages are kind of data packets with expectations from the publisher, how they will be handled by the subscribers. And then events, so flags that will inform subscribers that something has happened. And then over the years, integration specialists have created integration design patterns that kind of act as kind of formula for solving common scenarios when connecting data, applications, systems, and devices. And there are now dozens of proven patterns and practices that can be called upon. So if you think of APIs, workflows, messages, events as the Lego blocks that need to be put together to kind of create something, then the patterns and practices are the Lego kits. They are the kind of the proven prescriptive guidance to build something specific and achieve success. So where does Azure kind of fit into all of this? So the Azure Lego blocks fill each one of those areas. So we've got API management, we've got logic apps, we've got service bus, and we've got event grid. And then collectively, we refer to these as the Azure Integration Services. And so when you combine them in these kind of proven patterns, they then can deliver this kind of enterprise-ready, event-based, serverless compute experience, and driving efficiency, consistency, in integrating applications across the cloud and on-premise. And then there are many kind of integration scenarios that the Azure Integration Services can help address, including the examples in that kind of graphic. So things like application to application, where they all may be designed, developed, and deployed independently, but they need to interface with each other. So we can use those building blocks and get the right integration pattern. Maybe business process automation, the use of technology to execute recurring tasks or processes in a business where manual effort can be replaced. So that kind of helps to kind of minimize cost, increase efficiency, and then streamline the processes. Business to business, electronic flow across organizations is now common. And so with support for kind of data transformation, the various file and data standards and protocols, we can trade information with customers, partners, and suppliers. Software as a service is a kind of key technology pillar today of a modern business. Azure integration enables you to automate processes using out-of-the-box connectors to interface with these commonly used services and software as a service type applications. And then the last example scenario is really, the connection of physical devices at the edge with the cloud, and it kind of empowers organizations to build these innovative solutions. So, Azure Integration Services simplifies embedding IoT into your business, collection and exchange of massive volumes of data from smart devices and sensors, and then integration with those applications that are going to provide insight and actions. So what I'm going to do is just drill down into each of those four kind of Azure components. So the first one is Azure Logic Apps. This is a platform to easily automate workflows and orchestrate business processes. So it comes with this kind of powerful Webflow designer that can either work in a browser or can work in Visual Studio. It uses this kind of serverless architecture, which relies on triggers. So something has to happen to invoke one of these processes. So that something could be like a webhook, something could maybe arrive in the file system, storage, service bus, something has to happen to initiate a logic app. And then out of the box connectors, lots of kind of value or kind of in these connectors that just reduces the amount of work to connect to these other systems. So these are kind of either Microsoft or third party written, but if you're connecting to something that isn't kind of readily available, you can write your own custom connector. And then for these B2B scenarios, Logic App includes a lot of the capabilities that were previously in the BizTalk server platform. There's an example of a workflow designer. As I said, that could be in Visual Studio, could be in the browser. And then the idea is you can paint the business process. You've got a toolbox of activities and you drag and drop them and kind of join them up. And then you've got things like if statements and, you can invoke other logic apps. So paint the process. And one of the nice things is inputs and outputs of activities flow down. So the output of one activity could be the input into the next activity. So Azure API management, this is the platform to publish APIs to developers and connect to backend APIs. So the idea is that you've got a single endpoint that exposes all your APIs. And that single endpoint is where you can start to configure policies. So you can secure your APIs, you can gain insight on what's being used in those APIs. And the key thing is there's a developer portal that makes it really easy for developers to understand your APIs and kind of leverage them. So when you deploy API management, this is what it looks like. So you've got those three components. You've got your proxy, which acts as the kind of the interface to those backend APIs. And just to call out, those APIs could reside anywhere. As long as networking is in place, you can connect to those backend APIs. Then there's the developer portal. So that's where a developer goes to understand, and there's kind of documentation snippets for all the different languages. And the nice thing is the developer portal automatically gets populated with the content. So it's not a lot of work to maintain that. And then there's the admin. The third component is the Azure Service Bus. So this is a kind of platform to provide scalable, reliable cloud messaging as a service. So reliable, asynchronous message and delivery. So it's all about decoupling your applications with each other. And then there's a number of kind of advanced messaging features. So, decoupling and providing durability are primary drivers for using the service bus. So a good example maybe is like a website is capturing transactions or maybe orders. What you can do is stick them in the queue and then have a back-end fulfillment that then starts to process them. So the transaction is captured, the user can go and do whatever, and then the fulfillment process kind of kicks in and processes each transaction from the queue. And then the last one is the Azure Event Grid. So this is a platform to provide reliable event delivery at scale. So if we look at the next diagram, what we can see is the event grid's in the middle, and then we have the concept of sources and event handlers. The event sources are a number of things. So they could be Azure systems. They could be things like blob storage. You know, something happens in the blob storage system, it fires an event. Likewise, resource groups, subscriptions, service bus, Azure Maps, you know, everything in Azure will have the ability to be an event source. You can also write your own custom applications that could write to Event Grid. And then also we started to open this up that partners such as Auth0 can also fire events. And then on the right hand side, you've got the subscribers to those events. So this could be like the serverless code, functions, could be logic apps, it could be webhooks, it could be, and there's a number of things. The other thing to kind of call out underpinning this now is Cloud Events 1.0. So now Event Grid was the first major event broker to support this standard. There's a link there, and Cloud Events is this specification that enables kind of common formats across event data. So it just helps with that interoperability across services, platforms, and systems. Okay, so that's integration services in a nutshell. Gone through it pretty quickly. There is a white paper that would basically take you through it in a little bit more detail. What we'll now do is we'll pass to Dave, and Dave's going to cover Logic App Futures. Yep, great. Yes, yeah, thanks very much, Mark. I was very impressed that you managed to get a reference to Minecraft in there in a talk about integration. So that was pretty cool. So let me just share my screen. Excellent. Okay, so I try and keep this to around 30 minutes or so we can get some good time for questions at the end. But yeah, so we've got some quite exciting updates that have been happening with Logic Apps. So just going to talk through those fairly quickly now. So just as a reminder, Mark did a great job of talking through Azure Integration Services, of which Logic Apps is a part. But it's worth just recapping on some of the features of Logic Apps just to help with the general understanding. So there is a visual workflow designer. And remember, Logic Apps are about orchestrating calls to different APIs and different systems into a flow that could be short-lived or it could be long-running. And of course, the Logic Apps platform is running on serverless compute, so you don't have to worry about servers or how those get patched, monitored, managed, etc., etc. This is all completely managed. And of course, being a visual designer, you can build workflows really quickly. You can build some quite complex scenarios quickly, and then just deploy those into the cloud. And as I said, they can be long running, lasting for days, weeks, or even months. And we have around 450 connectors now. I don't have time to go through those, but there are lots and lots to talk to, lots of different systems that you might want to connect to and different services. So if that's Logic Apps, if we look at a sister product, Azure Functions, which I'm sure lots of people have used, at first glance, there are some similarities. Both are serverless. Functions is about writing code. So if you have a requirement to just write code, then Functions can be a great choice. Logic Apps, of course, is that visual that has that visual designer that allows you to go and build complex workflows. But there are a number of things that differentiate Functions that make them really quite nice to use, and from a deployment point of view and a management point of view. So to begin with, you can take your Logic Apps, you can take your Functions and you can build them locally in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. You can run them locally, you can set breakpoints, and so you can test your function without having to deploy it into the cloud. You get flexible hosting, so you can deploy your function into Azure using the compute that we have for the Functions runtime, or you can containerize your function and then deploy it into a cluster of your choice, Kubernetes or whatever it might be. VNet access, so you can use the Functions premium tier and you can get access to virtual networks, so your private resources, and you can access
or you can set your function to be private with a private IP address, and you get things like deployment slots and application insight support. So the choice about whether or not to use something like logic apps or functions should really be about the business problem that you're facing, and it should be about the developer experience. And what we found is that customers quite often look at these two things, and then they may decide to go with logic apps because of everything it offers, but then quite often get into the items here kind of listed in purple, where they might want VNet access, or they might want a private IP address, or they might want to containerize it. And so those things, although some of them are possible today with the Logic Apps ISE SKU, which I'll talk about a bit later, that does have a very different price point. So customers sometimes would go down the functions route for these reasons. And that's why we announced Logic Apps running on the functions runtime, primarily to get all of these goodies that you saw in the previous slide. So we went into public preview last year, and we're just about to go into general availability next week, in fact. But we've got some details on that later. So I'm just going to run through some of the key features that we see with Logic Apps single tenant, this new update to Logic Apps. So the first is, of course, we can develop and test locally in Visual Studio Code. So with that, you get a local project structure that contains the artifacts for your project. You can, of course, then hook that up to GitHub or Azure DevOps or your source repository of choice. And being able to run this locally it is really, really good. And also having support for breakpoints, fairly early days for that, but you can set a breakpoint in your workflow and go and look at the state of that action as the Logic app is executing. And the configuration is now managed through your local settings file in the same way that it would for a function. So you can reference those parameters directly from the Logic app. Those familiar with Logic apps today will know that they're deployed through an ARM template where you have to configure ARM template parameters for things like URLs, etc. that might change between environments. You then have to create a Logic apps parameter, then map the two things, and then reference that parameter from the action. So it's a bit more complicated today. With this offering, that becomes significantly simpler. We have a brand new designer. I've got a couple of demos in a few minutes, so we'll go and look at those. And the new designer, just got a screenshot on the screen here, is about making use of the available real estate on the screen and being able to have maximum space for you to view your workflow. Workflows can get fairly complex, so having the ability to see your workflow in a single page and being able to expand different parts of the workflow and get a really good representation is really what we're trying to do, and you'll understand that a bit more when I give you a demo in a few minutes. There are some really good performance gains with Logic apps with the new offerings. So we have stateless Logic apps. So if you look at this Logic app on the screen here, it's doing something really quite simple. It takes an HTTP request, it makes a call to an API to get some stock, and it makes a call in parallel into SQL Server. It then takes the response of both of those actions, aggregates them, and sends them back to the client. So these are two read-only operations. There's no state involved. We're not persisting anything. I might have a user on the end of a button click in a website. So when this Logic app executes today, then each action has a persistence associated with it. And this is done for availability purposes, so that if the underlying compute fails, then the Logic app is able to continue where it left off. And this makes perfect sense for long-running processes that could be going on for minutes, days, weeks, or even months. For those types of processes, being able to continue in the event of a failure makes perfect sense. But for this kind of scenario, persisting state when all we're doing is just reading some data doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So that's what stateless logic apps are, that we've removed the need to have state persisted as the actions execute through the workflow, which gives them great performance gains. And you can mix and match them as well. So you can have a stateful logic app calling a stateless logic app, and there are some scenarios where that's a really good fit. But primarily, these are the kind of scenarios where you have something synchronous, like the workflow that you see on the screen. So we have two types of connector. We have built-in connectors rather, and Azure connectors. Now the built-in connectors, they run as part of the logic app's runtime. So if the logic app, for example, is connected to a private network, which we can now do, so the logic app is able to connect to your VNet, your virtual network in Azure, which might give you access to your on-prem resources or other private resources that are in Azure. And of course, these are resources that have a private IP address. They're not publicly exposed. So all of the connectors that are built in can access all of those resources that are on your virtual network. And we have a bunch of those today. And I think there might be one or two more coming for the GA release next week. And as time moves on, we'll see more connectors moving into that internal runtime, giving them access to VNet, etc. But then we have the cloud-based connectors. And these are connectors that could be things like talking to Dynamics or Salesforce, where it doesn't really make sense for those to be running as part of the runtime. So those are still available, but they're cloud hosted, which means that your logic app will call out to that connector, and the connector will then manage the calls that are going out to that external API or system that you're talking to. We also have the connector SDK, and the connector SDK allows you to build your own connectors that you can then deploy into the logic app's runtime. So these aren't going to be cloud-based connectors. These are connectors that you will deploy alongside your logic app. And of course, that means that you can go and build for any particular scenario that you might have in your organization. They're all built in .NET Core. But of course, if you build your connector and deploy inside your logic app, and that's connected to your VNet, then your connector will be able to connect to those private resources. And of course, this is going to offer much better performance, because the connectors that are running inside the logic app's runtime they're not subject to the throttling limits that the Azure connectors have. For those familiar with logic apps today, you'll know that we have an integration account, and the purpose of the integration account is to store artifacts like XML schemas, XSLT transformations, and liquid templates for JSON transformations. And the integration account is where these things are stored, and your logic app, in order to call one of those maps, would need to be associated with that integration account, and then you can go and add an action to go and call into the integration account to execute an XML transform, for example. Whereas what we've done now is taken the mapping and schemas capability and moved that into the project structure of the logic app, which means that you can deploy and test your maps locally. Do that directly in VS Code, and then when you deploy, those artifacts will be stored alongside your logic app. So again, if you look at an integration account, you'll notice that it has some limits, throughput limits, artifact limits. Of course, those will go away if you're doing this locally. And it also means you don't need to pay for an integration account for mapping purposes. So quite a big cost saving there as well. But I'll jump into that in a few minutes' time and show you a quick demo. Conscious of time, about 15 minutes left. So from a hosting perspective, Today we have consumption, which is pay per action. We have the integration service environment, which offers a flat cost, but it does have virtual network access and private IP address if you're hosting HTTP endpoints, but it does have a very different cost profile. And it is significantly more expensive than running the consumption tier and more expensive than using functions for the similar types of kind of requirements like VNet access, for example. But now we have this Logic App single tenant where we can deploy our Logic Apps essentially onto the Azure Functions runtime, which is a premium plan of functions, although for GA that is changing. But we'll get more details on that next week. But essentially under the hood, this is using the similar features to the premium plan of Azure Functions. And of course, that does mean that you can containerize your Logic App and run it anywhere you want to. And this is a really key thing. So you could take your Logic App, run it on-prem, you could run it in Azure, you could run it in somebody else's cloud, and kind of opening up some of these more scenarios where Logic Apps just couldn't tackle before. Things like the edge, for example. So security, I've talked a bit about this already, but you can now, through private link, secure your Logic App to have a private IP address. You've got VNet connectivity. You could also lock down your Logic App, and you can do this with functions as well. But you can lock your Logic App down to have a private storage account. So as the Logic App is executing, all of its state is stored within a storage account, and also the deployment artifact, if you're deploying your Logic App, has got a zip file associated with it. That can also be private. And like I said, you can do that with functions as well. And OAuth authorization, which is there today in functions, not quite there at the moment in the new Logic Apps, but watch this space. We also get application insights, which I was really, really pleased to see. And those of you who saw my App Insights talk will be familiar with some of this. But what it does give you is this end-to-end correlated view. So as the Logic App is executing, if there is a client calling the Logic App, might be a browser, a single page app, it could be something calling API management, and API management then talks to the Logic App, and the Logic App then calls another bunch of APIs. All of these things get correlated through App Insights. It automatically adds these correlation headers into the call, and it's then used to be able to get this correlation within App Insights. So you see, I will show you this in a sec, but this is the application map that you can see on the screen here, which shows the dependencies, and then we've just got a business graph that I created based on some of the data that I was recording from the Logic App as it executes. So I'm going to jump into some demos. First thing I'm going to show is the new designer. So if we just take a look at the, this is an example of it's a bit of a contrived example, but it demonstrates the point. This is Logic Apps today in the consumption tier. So we've got a couple of variables. We've then got a condition, and I've then got another condition here. So we've got a couple of nested conditions, and we just scroll down here. We're going and kind of sending a couple of emails. But then over the right here, I've got a switch statement, and if I just scroll back, there we go. I kind of have to scroll right over there. And if I want to configure one of these actions, so if I choose this one down here, kind of pops up here in the center of the screen. So it's already taking up some space that I might need to visualize the next action or something. So it's kind of taking up quite a bit of the real estate on the screen. So if I just switch to, this is, sorry, 2 seconds. The new designer. There we go, new designer. So if you just edit this, this is the same workflow, but you can already see that I get a much better view of what's going on in my business process. And if I click on, say, this send an email action, you can see that I get a nice pop-up come to the right-hand side. I can still see my workflow, but I get this pop-up where I can go and edit my action, and then I can just go and slide that away. So it is a much nicer experience, and certainly I think for even logic apps of low to medium complexity, you get a great benefit from using this new designer, just because you get so much better use of the available space on the screen. And I'm just going to, for those of you who haven't seen logic apps before, I'm just going to do a very quick demo of calling. You may have seen this. This is my standard demo that I do, but I've got a power up here. This is running on my phone, and it's just an order process. I'm using Microsoft Your Phone to control my phone through Windows. But if I just go and order an Xbox One X, actually I don't know why I did that. Much better off ordering a Series X. So let's just go back and is it there somewhere? Yeah, I think so. There we go. So let's go and order one of those. Okay. So if I just go to this logic app, if I go and look at workflows, and I've got this submit order workflow, then we can see here all of the logic apps that have succeeded and those that have failed, and the demo gods went with me earlier, had a few failures, but it's working now. And this is actually a similar experience that you get today with the current with logic apps consumption, but the difference is that this is of course rendered in the new designer. So I can click on create customer. I can see all of the settings here that I'm using to go and call into SQL. I can see the response that's come back. I've got an API here, and I can see I've got stock level coming back from my API. And of course, because these are, I've got an open API definition for this action. So because I have an open API definition, this gets rendered correctly in the designer, where it picks out any values that I've defined in that definition. Couple of things to call out as well. This call to SQL here, this is actually a private SQL. This is a SQL database that I've protected with private links, so it has a private IP address, as is this call here. This is calling out to an IP address that's private. So just showing, that logic apps can now connect to private networking using a virtual network. Talked about this is the application map. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but this is showing that I've got API management here calling into my logic app, and then my logic app is calling out to a bunch of other stuff. And you'll see I've got a couple of other kind of stragglers here. That's because I've actually used this App Insights instance for a couple of other things, so that's why they appear as not connected to anything. But if my logic app were to call into something else, and that then called into something else, then you would see that flow on the screen here. And of course, I can do things like this is the chart that you saw earlier, where I can just go run a query, and this is just looking at the different orders that have been placed. And I'm doing that just by the logic app writing out some data to App Insights, or I can do something a bit more interesting with kind of result codes, etc. But you kind of get the idea that with App Insights, we've got some really good some really good things out of the box with things like application map. but we could also go and write our own queries to slice and dice what's going on with our workflow. So let's jump into Visual Studio Code. Right, so I've got the Logic Apps extension, and you can just go and download the Logic Apps extension. It's called, I think it's called Logic Apps Preview, I think it's called. Azure Logic Apps, there it is, Azure Logic Apps Preview, currently version 13, but you can just go and download that, no cost, and just start using it. So this is what the local project structure looks like. So you'll see I've got this workflow.json here. That's just the workflow file. Looks very similar to current Logic Apps. And this is the visual representation. Now you'll also see here I've got this artifacts folder with maps. And I've got a liquid map here, a liquid template. For those not familiar with liquid templates, they just provide a really nice, easy way of being able to transform JSON from one structure to another. So if I just open up this output here, this is just, I've just set up VS Code so that I can go and execute my map and visualize the results here straight away. And here's my input document, Mr. H living in Cheltenham there. So if I just go and kind of execute that, then that appears there. I can just go and make a change here, F1. Then if I just go and there we go, you can see that change. Or I could go and add something like phone number, and then reference my phone number. And if I execute that, it's not called phone number, I think it's just called phone. There we go. And there's a kind of made up phone number, but you can see that you could just go and test these things locally. I've got my liquid template directly here within VS Code, and then I can go and run it locally. So this is now going to start a local instance of my Logic app running inside my development machine here. And if I go to my workflow file and I click overview, here we can see the various runs that I've done, and I also get this local endpoint that you can see as localhost here. So I can go to something like Postman, and I can just go and execute this, and you can see here I'm passing in this phone number, but that's just executed my map. And the way that I did that, just to show you, is that I've got this transform shape. Sorry, just get rid of that. I've got this transform shape, and I'm just referencing the name of my map, which is map request, that you can see over here, map request.liquid. And so if we just click on add an action, you can see here that these are all the connectors that are built in, as I was talking about earlier. These two, don't be confused by these. These are custom, these are connectors that I've actually built with the connector SDK, and they're available in GitHub. So if anybody wants to go and play with those, you can, because these two aren't today available inside the Logic Apps runtime. So if you wanted to connect to an SFTP endpoint that was private, for example, then you would be able to do that. But with this connector, you can do that directly within your Logic App. And it's actually fairly straightforward to build these connectors, and I've got one here. This is the FTP connector. I won't go into all the details of that right now, but the product group have put a really nice blog that talks about how to build these connectors, and we are starting to see a few of these pop up now. So as I said, we've got these two here. Right. I think I am almost done. So if we just come out of the demo and go back to the presentation. Down. It's gone. Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, so we talked about the new designer, we looked at the local project, talked about the connector SDK, we looked at local mapping, and we've had a look at application insights. So just as a summary, some of the key things that we get with the Logic Apps single tenant. You can build your Logic Apps locally, you can run them locally. And that experience I talked about with being able to debug, that's only going to get better over time. We've got stateless Logic Apps for those low latency scenarios. It's a brand new designer, which I've been using now for kind of a good few months. And I really love it. It's a lot better than the current one. You get private IP address, VNet connectivity. We've got App Insight support, containers, no need for an integration account for mapping, still need it for EDI functionality, but you don't need it for mapping and schema validation. Deployment slots, custom domains, that's coming, and OAuth authorization. A couple of things to call out. So we're going into general availability next week, which is at Build. And Derek, he's from the Logic Apps product group, he's giving a talk, which is an on-demand talk. So there's no particular time. I don't think that you have to go and kind of watch that and go and watch it at your own leisure. But they're going to be talking about all of these things in a lot of detail, talking about some of the new things that they're being announced next week, things like pricing, etc., that can't go into at the moment. But yeah, for the latest updates, go and see that. We've then got the Integrate conference, which is coming up between the 1st and 3rd of June, completely virtual, as is Build, of course. And the product group are going to be doing quite a few different talks there. Industry experts going into a lot of detail on integration all up, but in particular, there's going to be a lot of focus on Logic Apps and the new runtime that I've talked about today. And that is it.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so this is the section that I tend to do each kind of month, and I'm just going to update you with stuff that's new, just very briefly, 10 seconds on each, but just to flag stuff that's kind of appearing. So the first one is, well, the first 4 have all now hit GA and available. So the first one is Azure Resource Mover. So this enables you to move large-scale kind of topologies with confidence with fewer steps before. So it'll help you identify all the dependencies across the resources. Just turn this on. So identify the dependencies across the resources that you want to move and make sure everything that works as expected after the move. Second one is Azure Static Web Apps hit GA. So it's a low-cost service, modern web apps with a static front end and a dynamic back end powered by serverless APIs. Third one, ADO Delivery Plans 2.0 has hit GA. Extensions and integrations to provide timeline and roadmap capabilities, and these kind of span across teams and projects. API management, the developer portal has now hit GA from an open source availability point of view. So you can now take that, self-host it, and then you can put your own customization in it. New service, Azure Web PubSub service preview. I'm going to discuss that more on the next slide, so let's leave it to there. Previous session, we talked about .NET Framework 4, how people should be getting onto .NET 5. we've announced that certain versions of the .NET framework have now hit end of support. It's all to do with the cryptography that those particular versions that use, they're hitting end of support. We talked in the last month's session about there's now tools to help you upgrade from .NET framework to .NET 5 and 6. Microsoft acquired a company called Kinvolk. Kinvolk's got a rich history of innovation around open source, cloud native distributed computing. They've worked on container optimized Linux, and they kind of created the Rocket container runtime, which is a competitor to Docker. So interesting where that acquisition, the technology and the people, where they're going to end up in Microsoft. Bicep version 0.3. Bicep is an alternative to ARM for infrastructure as code. It offers a more kind of structured programming language syntax, seen by many as being much easier to work with than the kind of verbose and complex JSON that ARM uses. So it's a cleaner syntax. It improves kind of type safety, better support for modularity and code reuse. Version 3.0 is fully supported by Microsoft for production use. We announced Visual Studio 2022. It's going to be 64-bit throughout, meaning you can kind of open edit, debug the biggest and most complex solutions now without running out of memory. It's going to be a revised UI, different icons, new fonts, various product enhancements. And then last one on that list is that we've changed the Azure icon. So it's starting to roll out across various kind of products, and it's part of the kind of the Microsoft Fluent design system, and now just add consistency with the icons used by various other Microsoft products. There's my kind of Twitter handle I use. That I kind of post things that are new. So if you want to kind of, if you're on Twitter and you want to know what's new, maybe just kind of follow that link there. Okay, so we talked about. I kind of delayed the Web PubSub service to the next slide. So this is a new service. It's in preview. It's a real-time. It's enabling you to use WebSockets and use the publish and subscribe pattern to build these kind of real-time web applications. In the past, this implementing at scale has always been a challenge. This service allows you to manage many WebSocket connections for kind of intensive apps. Integrates with Azure Functions. Support for WebSockets is found in most modern web browsers. It is an alternative to SignalR, but the WebSocket protocol libraries are much more widely used across a breadth of platforms and technologies. And what we're going to do is now demo this. And what we're going to do is, if you want to participate, could you go to that URL, and we'll have a we'll all do this demo. So if you go to that link, that should take you to so it's ACRMS /PubSub, and that will take you to this page here. And there's two things. This is the demo page, and this is the connection string. So if you click on there and you cut and paste that, you'll end up with an application here. So this is an application that's using the service. We put our connection string in here. If people could follow along and do it as well. So you can see my application is now connected to the service. And what we can do is subscribe to groups. So for example, I could subscribe to the red group, and I could subscribe maybe to the yellow group, and I could subscribe maybe to the blue group. I suggest if we all use colors and lowercase, and then what we can do is send a message. So if I want to send a message to red, and I could, hello red. Right, so yeah, I can start to see people coming in. So I'm also on blue and I'm also on yellow. So so what we could do is do something like this. Windows dot, I don't know if people know that, the Windows dot opens up the emojis, so we could send and get that too. So the other thing we could look at is, so this is the service. So if we go in here, really easy to create this service, just to go plus a resource, and then you get this usual kind of UI with the blades. What you do is you go to the keys, you get the key, that's the key that we're using, and then what we can look at the overview, and we can see that out of 200 plus people on this call, 18 are kind of playing, 16, 17. So 180 of you couldn't be bothered. Okay. Right, that's PubSub. Pretty near the end. One other thing. So last month we looked at App Insights. There is part of App Insights called App Insights Profiler, and this is about when your app is slow and the metrics don't tell you why, you can go deeper with the profiler. So it kind of collects performance traces, it runs in the background without harming your app. The product team are developing a new feature called PerfLens that fits within App Insights Profiler, and it's based on various machine learning models, and it provides actionable insight into performance issues. If anybody wants to connect with the product team are reaching out and want people to try this out and work with them. If anybody is kind of using App Insights and has got experience with performance issues in their applications, please reach out and we'll connect you with the product team. They want people to participate in their preview. At this moment in time, we're talking about .NET Framework and .NET Core languages and stacks. So an opportunity to get early exposure and maybe influence the direction of this product. Okay, I'm at the pretty much at the end. So just to kind of call out the Azure MS Learn, it's hub for learning content. You know, it's got modules, learning paths, information around the various certifications, and a curated video platform. It's you know, grouped together, these modules provide these kind of learning paths. So it's a good area. Save the date. So next week is Build, 25th to 27th. There's the link there. The next Lunch and Learn session that I'm running that's this kind of format is on the 4th of June, 2 weeks away. I'll send out invites shortly. And the main topic is going to be a topic, why I love IoT, Internet of Things. Okay. Closing, any questions that we haven't answered? I'm going to open up the mics shortly for people who want to hang around. I know we're on time, but we'll hang around. Feedback is welcome. It helps me get people like Dave to contribute. If we're getting positive feedback, this is good. Recording slides will be available. Reach out if we haven't answered questions. There's my contact again. Reach out if I can help. Okay, so I know we're at time. Probably most of you or many of you will now drop out. Dave, have you managed to answer some of those outstanding questions?
Yeah, I've answered quite a few. Okay.
If anybody wants to come off mic, could they hold their hand? You know, with the so if you kind of flag you want to come off. If anybody wants to come off mute. If anybody wants to speak, we can enable the mic. Eric, your mic is now enabled.
Okay, thank you. We are doing on a big project after Alight with the APIM, API management, and we did some POC and so on. And we are each sprint demo the capabilities to our CTO and other stakeholders. And we are also looking to the developer portal, or can you go to your customer partner to share, to document your API and so on, and the business who is behind. And the Contonzo with the default one, then we put some look and feel, but it's very low dummy developer portal. And so we know that we can already download and have a standalone, download it and manage yourself. But still, for me, it's like the APIM management gateway is enterprise class, but the portal is dummy class. It's really incredible the difference between the capabilities, policies, rules, integration G2C, with the ID we did, we test some policies, the product, all this stuff is okay. But on the portal content, to point to different content, to a blog, to consume it, the content, we've write it, technical write it, we are nowhere. When we look to other, we should do this and then we say, okay, can we do it? There's nothing there for that. It's really a huge gap on this component in the APIM, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be these issues, and you called out the feedback. That used to be in there, and I think they dropped it from the portal because no one, or when they do their focus groups and see what people are using, they found people weren't using it. I don't know, David. Any thoughts? Limitations on the dev portal?
I think that is it Eric?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we should get that feedback to the product group, and kind of. Yeah. I don't know if you've done that already, but
I did that to our account manager, to Daniel. So it's he's aware. Also, you can do suggestion, feedback in this on. I don't know.
I mean, Dave's got connections right to the heart of the product team, so maybe send over your concerns to me. I can loop in Dave, and Dave can loop in his contacts.
Okay.
Yeah, and if we need to get a call set up, we can do that as well. Okay. So yeah, if you can share, because the challenges you've had,
it will be a big project, because we the strategy at Alight is API first. So you imagine the impact that we will go on this, and we want to have a sort of a prototype development where we will for June, and then different stack and business at Alight will say, okay, how can I publish my API? How can I put all this nice documentation, picture, video, and so how can I have feedback? Okay, is there a form? How can I know feedback? There was, and then for the moment we say, not possible, not very limited with Azure developer portal, and should we look to something else or an add-on, and so as a standalone. But really, it was a big surprise to see the difference between the management and gateway capabilities and the developer portal, which is also very a key, I think, component when you go for APIs.
So I've seen some fairly nice portals that other customers have created, and some fairly deep complexity, but I don't necessarily know. I've not been involved in that process. I'm not sure what they went through to get there. So maybe what might help you is if we could discuss with you what maybe some other customers have done and how they've done it, and the product group are going to have a lot more detail. And because there might be some ways that we can overcome some of the challenges that you've got, and some of it could be roadmap. But either way, if you share that with us, then we'll follow up on it for you.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Speak later. Anybody else want to come off mute? Okay, Matthew, your mic is now enabled.
Thanks. That was a very useful talk. One thing I found a few years ago with Logic App is to do XML transformation, I had to go onto the enterprise tier for pricing, which became massively more expensive. Is that still the case?
No. So to do mapping today, you would have to use the integration account, which I think is what you're referring to, which is I forget how much, something like £700 a month, I think, for the standard tier. No, you don't. So with the Logic App single tenant that's going GA next week, you can just go and execute those maps locally with no need for an integration account, so no extra charge.
Okay, that makes a big difference.
It does, yeah. Yeah, it's really good. And you get better performance as well. It's just a better story all around.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Good news.
Very good news. That killed my Azure credits within about 2 days the last time I had it on.
Yeah, I can imagine. But yeah, I mean, if you need more details, feel free to reach out.
Okay, thanks.
Manuel, just enabling your mic.
It's Logic Apps, a replacement for BizTalk.
Well, Logic App, sorry, BizTalk Server is still a product. It's still available. A new version of it came out not that long ago. Is it a replacement? I think Logic Apps can do, and what Azure Integration Services can do, almost everything that BizTalk can do. There might be one or two things that can't be done, but the vast majority of things can. And we have the BizTalk migration tooling as well. That I don't know if you've seen that. That came out fairly recently, which will give you a head start in migrating from BizTalk to Logic Apps if you wanted to go for a more cloud-friendly approach, because BizTalk, of course, being a server product, is more suited to running on-prem. Yeah, is it a replacement? I'd say in terms of capability, yes. I don't think there's much that you can do in BizTalk that you couldn't do in Azure today, in Azure Integration Services.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone for any more? Matthew again?
You showed using Logic Apps in VS Code. Is there any plans to do it in the normal Visual Studio?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll take that back to their product group and ask.
The old designer, you could see, Dave.
Well, it was the other way around. So with consumption Logic Apps, you could use Visual Studio 2019 to edit your Logic Apps, and that was the best way, by the way, for anyone using Logic Apps today. That's the best way of being able to maintain a deployment template, is using Visual Studio 2019. And in VS Code, you could view your Logic App, but you couldn't edit it. Whereas with the new single tenant Logic Apps, it's the other way around. So you can edit in Visual Studio Code, but there's no support in Visual Studio 2019. I can check on that, but I'm not aware of any plans to offer VS 2019, or Visual Studio rather.
Okay, do you know why that is?
I've not asked the question specifically, but if you have a look at the extensions available in VS Code for Azure, there are loads, and it's definitely, from a customer point of view, maybe not all clearly, but most customers are moving towards VS Code and using VS Code, especially if they've got Java, etc. Lots of our customers do. They're organizations that have lots of different platforms and programming languages, so they go for VS Code, and of course they get the Azure experience then through the extensions, no matter what language they're using, and so for them that's working. That's definitely something we've seen from customers. So it's almost certainly going to be driven by customer demand. But if it's something that we can take back and ask. I'm guessing from your question that you're more of a VS 2019 type of person.
Well, it's 2015 as I'm using BizTalk 2016, but yeah, I don't have any objection to using VS Code. I was just wondering why.
Yeah, I don't know, Mark, if you want to add anything to that.
I'm just surprised that I always thought it was on both, so I've learned something myself. So, Ben, you've been waiting some time. Do you want to? You're now enabled.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, will there be any kind of migration path from old to new with this? I guess it's going to be there's going to be quite a lot of changes to be made. It's not going to be like for like from one time to the other. So, yeah, is there anything available?
Not today, as in today, but I think fairly soon. I know it's something the product group are looking at. Yeah. So I think the answer is going to be yes, that there will be a way of doing that. And actually, if you go and look at the workflow definition It's actually very, very similar. None of the, so the, the way that you create actions and the visual aspect has changed, and where you get your config from has changed, and there are local connectors now. But in terms of the schema syntax, it's not really that different. If you go and open up the two side by side, in fact, I've done it. I've taken a workflow from V1 and I've migrated it into, sorry, I shouldn't call it V1, from the consumption logic apps, and I've migrated it without too many issues. But I know it's something that the product group are looking at. So if we, I don't know if I've met you before, but if we can kind of take your details, then we can follow up on that.
Yeah, Ben, reach out.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, I'll send you both an email. And yeah, it was me. Debbie was asking about the creating sort of an abstract template as well for these. I end up doing a lot of copy and pasting for things like error handling. That's quite common for certain, yeah, for certain like API calls and etc. Which you sort of think, if I could, like, you create an abstract class, if I could create like an abstract template, and then sort of you'd say, right, if on error, utilize this bit of logic, rather than sort of I find myself sort of having to copy and paste a lot of ARM templates to the point of RSI on one project. So yeah, it'd be good if there was some way of doing that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it'd be good to follow up on that. I mean, other than the techniques I talked about. And of course, you can now have multiple workflows within a single project, or within a single logic app. So it is possible to create one workflow that did a specific task, and then just call that from the workflow that you're building, so that you can get better kind of composability than you've got today. You can do that today, but it's not quite not as nice as having a project with your workflow in it. So
yeah, and the current designer in Visual Studio, if you had anything slightly getting on complex or large or nested, you certainly felt it on the resources on your machine and etc. You get really serious lag. So yeah, it looks a million times better. Really looking forward to testing it. Yeah,
well, the GA next week. So yeah, exciting. But yeah, if you I mean, it sounds like you've got some logic apps already deployed today. So if you want to talk about how you might go about using the stuff we've talked about today, then yeah, reach out and we'll talk it through.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Probably a few of us. Yeah, in GT, that would be great. Thanks.
Manuel, you still got your hand up. Is that another question, or you okay? Far away.
Yeah, it's another question. Do we have any end of support dates, for .NET 4.8?
That's not been announced. There's no end of support yet.
Oh, okay.
So until they announce it, yeah. I mean, all I'd say is now's the time to start looking at .NET 5. I don't know if he was on last month's thing. We kind of touched on it.
Yeah, I was.
There's now a GitHub toolkit to help people migrate. There's lots of good reasons to get onto .NET 5. It's more compressed. It will run under Linux. It's just more lightweight, and when it's lightweight, it's going to be more cost effective when you're running it on a consumption place like Azure. So lots of reasons, but answering your question, not yet, no.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's just those earlier versions that I kind of listed earlier. The reason is they use a different type of crypto in the packages that's considered to be weak crypto. So I understand. So yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant.
Okay. Any more?
Where can I get these recordings?
So you can go to the same link that you used. So it's appdev/ and then the date. What I'll do is I'll put this recording in a location where that same URL will redirect to wherever the recording is. I don't know if he was on last month's one. Again, it's there now. So yeah, it's the date. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, I missed last month. Next
Yeah,
month's
so
my birthday, so.
again, I'll make sure it's recorded and it'll be on. So yeah, if you can either watch live or on, many people on demand. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Oh yeah, got it.
Okay, we've still got 40 people listening, or so. Anybody else? Okay, I think people are dropping. I mean, just finalize. My email's on the screen. Just any kind of questions afterwards, just reach out. Thank you. Hopefully, see you next month.